Here is an EO Alive Grande story.
Last week, we interviewed congressional candidate Alex Spencer. Our special political guest this week is Senator Mark Hass, Democratic candidate for Secretary of State. This office is primarily in charge of running state elections and auditing state agencies, also succeeding the governor when there's a vacancy in that office. Senator Hass told us more about himself and why he is running for this office.
My name is Mark Hass. I'm a state senator from Washington County. I've been in the Senate 12 years, and before that I was in the Oregon House for 6 years. And I'm running for Secretary of State. The reason I'm running is similar to why I got involved in public service in the first place. And that is, I grew up here. And when you grow up in Oregon, there's certain values instilled in you, especially when I was a kid in the 1970s. You take care of each other, you take care of the land, you certainly take care of schools, and you take care of the environment. I remember when I was a kid, for example, throwing something out the window of a car was like armed robbery. And that's kind of the value system I grew up with. And as I started, I left the state and came back, and then I was a journalist in Portland for some years. And I noticed during the 1990s that many of those values that I cared about seemed to be going backwards or being eroded, especially for schools. And so I ran for the legislature in hopes of returning us to some of those Oregon values that made part of us who we are. And so anyway, fast forward almost 20 years, this last session we passed the Student Success Act, which is going to be a boon for schools in Grande and across the state to finally add some extras to those states, to those school districts, to get them back some of those electives, to make class sizes smaller, to lengthen the school year, and to help do something about some of the communities that are underserved. And you have some of those there in the Grande, poverty, for example. And this isn't just paying lip service to that. It says, here's some money to help kids in poverty, La Grande. And so that kind of comes full circle. It felt like we were kind of riding the ship a little bit from what happened in the 1990s. And that felt like a good capstone to my career in the legislature. I've been specializing in some of these quirky responsibilities that the Constitution requires of the Secretary of State, such as campaign finance reform and election security. And this felt like a natural step. And so I'm running in the Democratic primary for Secretary of State. I think I have some accomplishments that qualify me. I know one that was very important to some of the folks in your area was the Oregon Promise. It is a free community college for kids who graduate from high school. And in some ways, we kind of stole that idea from your university over there. They used to do the Eastern Oregon Promise. And I said, hey, we can make this statewide for community colleges. And that's what we did. And so what that did was it gave hope to a lot of families who don't have a college-going culture. We have, I go to the Oregon Promise roundtables and orientation sessions, and I'll never forget the first one I went to. There was this young woman there from the little town of Banks out here in Washington County, and she was so excited. And I said, well, what are you going to study? And she said, I'm going to try to be a dental hygienist. And I thought, if I do the work and get the grades. And she explained to me that if she didn't have this plan, she'd be cleaning houses. That's what her mother did. That's what people in her family did. And so I met up with her a couple of years later when she was almost done with that program. And she was still very excited. She said, yeah, I'm doing my internship, and I think this is going to work out. And guess what? My sister's going to be just like me. She's going to do the Oregon Promise, and she wants to do the hygienist program just like me. But there's one thing she won't be able to say like me, and that is she won't be able to say she's the first person in our family to go to college. And so the Oregon Promise is something I'm very, very proud of. It's changed the culture in this state, and it's helping kids, not just in the metro area, it's helping kids in rural Oregon, especially over where you are, because all kids need opportunities, not just the ones in the city, but they need opportunities because we don't have what we had in my generation, maybe yours, Brett, in the where you can walk out of high school and into a mill. Those days are long gone. So we need something for these kids to learn a trade or get 2 years head start on their four-year degree. And that's what the Oregon Promise is all about. And that and the Student Success Act that passed in the last session are the things I'm most proud of, and I think help qualify me for the Secretary of State. I passed some big ideas in the Oregon State Capitol, and I've lost some big bills in the Oregon State Capitol, but I have learned the pressures, I have learned the system, and I'm ready to go. And the Oregonians need someone who is strong and experienced in that office. We've had 4 Secretaries of State in the last 4 years through deaths and resignations, and it's time for an overhaul of that office. I have some very specific ideas in how I would overhaul things and make elections more secure and get more voters to the polls. So I'm ready. Personally, I was trained as a journalist. I worked in radio stations and TV stations for many years, and finally ended up at KATU Portland for 16 years. I got married. I have 2 children. One is just about ready to graduate from college, and the other is a boy who is in middle school. And one of the things that we have done repeatedly, maybe 5 or 6 times, that gives me a touchstone to Grande is we have gone camping in the Wallowas, one of my favorite places in the entire world. And we always go through Grande and get gas, buy a sandwich, and go to camping. And then when we come back, we get gas, buy a sandwich, and it's just that place. And it's just so pretty over there. And so I have been in the advertising business in between sessions while I've been in the legislature the last 18 years. And we live in a suburb of Portland, in Beaverton of Washington County. And I've dedicated my life to public service. I have 1 wife, 1 son, 1 daughter, 1 dog, 1 cat, no redundancies. And I love this state. We've done a lot of horse camping. I don't know if I've gone snobby or gone soft, but horse camping makes backpacking look like something I'm not going to do it again because it's so much easier with horses. And that's really fun. We spend some time skiing. We go to Mount Hood and take the kids up, and for some reason we go to Timberline all the time. And we're just up there a week or so ago, before they had this big dump of snow. And, any parent will testify to the fact that a lot of your life at this stage in your life revolves around your kids. And so that's kind of what keeps us going. Secretary of State is a very critical position, not just because it's where you go. If something happens to the governor, you become governor. We're familiar with what happened to Cape Brown because it just happened 4 or 5 years ago. But in Oregon's 160-year history, that's only happened a handful of times. So it's very, very rare. The Secretary of State is in charge of our election system and keeping it safe and secure, and working with the county clerks in 36 Oregon counties. And so that means everything has to work on election day, and when those vote by mail ballots are out there. And that's a huge task. And when there's election coming up, all of these county clerks, I've visited many of them, they're really dedicated and really into the security and the process and the protocols. And it's like when there's an election day coming up, it's like the Super Bowl's coming up, and there's notes around saying 5 days until election day. Did you get this done? Did you get this done? And the Secretary of State oversees all of that. And all 36 counties have to work. I mean, if we can't certify the ballots in Gilliam County, we might not be able to certify a state election. So you could see the ramifications if we're electing a U.S. senator or governor or something like that. So it's very important. And in this day and age, when we have obvious meddling and people trying to hack into our system, the security is really important. We have vote by mail, so we're not vulnerable to massive voter fraud. As we say, you can't hack paper, and it's a felony if you hack 1 vote or mess with 1 vote. It's 2 felonies if you mess with 2 votes. And so that's not really our danger. It's sort of like why people don't counterfeit pennies or nickels and dimes. It's just not worth it. But where we are vulnerable is in the database of our registered voters, 2.8 million voters there. And it's in a big database system with 36 tentacles going out to all of the counties. And if somebody hacks into that and knocks Brent's ballot out of the system, then you don't get a ballot and you can see the problem. So I've been working with some technology people and some former Secretary of State employees about how to upgrade that system. Not that it's insecure now, but we need to be not just a step ahead, we need to be 10 miles ahead. And so I'm working on ways to make sure that that is secure. The Secretary of State also is the auditor of public accounts, which is the exact phrase used in the Constitution. It's the biggest division in the Secretary of State's office now. There are 75 state auditors. And what they do is they check to see what state agencies are doing, whether they're spending the money wisely, whether they're following the intent or the spirit of the law. And there is a type of audit that I like called performance audit or management audit, where it's not necessarily just making sure the money adds up, but you're looking at things like, are standards being followed? Are ethics being followed? Is there any discrimination? Was the intent of the law followed? And that's very, very important. And it's not punitive or anything, just make sure that we're all working on the same page. An example of this came a couple of months ago. The Secretary of State did an audit and found that, of all things, the veterinarians in Oregon and the agency that regulates them, they're not doing a good job on keeping controlled substances. You know, vets have narcotics in their shops just like doctors. And so there was some sloppy record keeping and there's some problems. And so now they have to revamp that whole system. And I think that's a good thing. That was found out by auditors who started digging in and into some problems there. And so that's an example of a performance audit. That's what the audits division does. The third and I think most important aspect that is the most little known is redistricting, redrawing. Every 10 years, we have to redraw new boundary lines for legislators and members of Congress because of growth and changes in our population. And that's really important because there's been some abuses in other states and we want these districts to be fair. We're probably going to get a new congressional district next year after the census is done. And that'll totally change the congressional boundaries as we've been used to them for the last 40 years. And so if the legislature can't do redistricting, then the Constitution says that falls on the Secretary of State. I've been through 2 redistricting sessions, Brent, and they're very hairy and they're very pressure packed. And they've left indelible imprints on my mind. And I understand what's going on with corridors and communities of interest. And I will be ready for that. I'll have my maps. I'll have my plans. I've been in a session where the legislature did not do its job and it fell upon the Secretary of State, and one where the legislature did do its job. And I think that classifies as battlefield experience. And I have that. You can't just say, well, I haven't been through a redistricting session, but I can hire some experts who will help me. So that's why I think I'm qualified for this position. I have a record. I think Oregonians know me, and I think they trust me over my years in television here in the metro area and in my years in public service. So that's why I'm running, and I'm looking for engagement from people in Eastern Oregon, Southern Oregon. I was over on the coast this weekend, and this is a statewide campaign, and it is not a Portland campaign, and that's why I'm talking to you and traveling to the coast. We were in Curry County a few weeks ago and going statewide. The best way to gauge how someone will behave or perform in the future is to look at how they performed in the past. And if someone looks back at my record of being independent and voting against my party at times and being that person, they'll feel very good about how I'll perform in the future. I think I have this in my DNA because of my journalism background, that fairness is probably one of the highest compliments you can pay a reporter. And in public service, it's kind of the same way. It's like, you know, Mark, I don't always agree with you on your positions, but you always tell it straight and you're fair and you listen to me. And so I support you. And so that's been my MO the entire 18 years I've been in the legislature. But your question is astute, because there is a debate in some circles as to whether this office should be a nonpartisan office. And I could argue that. It's just that it isn't right now. It's in the Constitution this way, and it would require a conversation in the legislature and a referral to voters to say, yes, it should be nonpartisan or not. You're really talking about the urban-rural divide, which has always plagued this state, but got to a higher temperature this last year with the cap and trade bill. I would say two things. First, I married a girl from Pendleton, and I have lots of family over there, so I'm over there a lot, and I listen to those people a lot. Second, I don't live in Portland. I'm in the suburbs outside, and I always had hoped one of my roles in the legislature would be to try to heal this urban-rural divide as someone who's kind of in between. And you mentioned there were a lot of angry people over there. I will tell you, there were a lot of angry people over in Portland too, because the cap and trade bill did not pass. And so we've got to find some common ground there. I know that there are people in your area who see climate change as a threat. I know they do. But their misgivings is, how is Little Oregon going to fix this? And why should I have to pay for it? It'll be more of a burden on us than it might be for people in Portland. And that's very fair. I mean, I just think that's a legitimate story. And the people in Portland see it differently. And they both feel there are strong feelings on both sides. My hope is, the way we were able to mitigate the Student Success Act to pass, I was in charge of that, and everybody had a say. And in the end, when we passed that bill, not everybody loved it, but it was never referred to the ballot. It just passed, and it's in effect now. It's in law, and schools will start seeing the benefits later this year. And I'm hoping that we can get a similar dynamic on the carbon bill in February. But I'm worried. I am worried that the feelings are so tense on both sides that maybe we won't. And as an Oregonian, that bothers me. I do think climate change is real, and I do understand the issues that many people in your part of the world have with it. And maybe this isn't time, maybe it's too much, but I do know some concessions have been made from the 2019 bill to the one that is being looked at in February. So I think there's something there. I think there's some wiggle room for some common ground and some sanity. And I do think there's a chance where we can put this out there. And if people don't like the law, they can go the referendum route and put it on the ballot and see what happens with the ballot. I think that's the most fair way to do this. And when I talked to some of the environmentalists in Portland, I said, if you don't think you can survive a ballot measure on this, then what are we doing? When I passed the schools bill, I always had in the back of my mind a thought to, okay, well, we may need to defend this at the ballot. So let's be reasonable here. Let's do this, but not this. And so I might, while I support the plan, I might be one of those who says, let's send it to voters, or let's leave it open and see if people want to send it to voters. And so that's probably the place where I would differ from some of my colleagues over here. But I've traveled over there. I've been to Ontario and on this issue and on the schools issue, and I know where people land. Like I say, I have in-laws who are on me on this, and but I think we have to do something. And I'd rather us not fight about it. I'd rather have us come to some kind of an understanding. It's an obscure part of law to most people, but it's very important. Essentially, if a bill that we are considering voting on has an emergency clause placed on it, that means it goes into effect as soon as the governor signs it, and there's no time to refer it to the ballot, which rarely but occasionally happens. But this bill in the 2019 session had an emergency clause on it, and had it passed, there would have been no opportunity for a ballot measure. And I think that was probably the number one reason so many people opposed it. There were people over here who opposed it, even supporters, who said, hey, wait a minute, I support this, but if the people want to vote on it, this is Oregon, that's what we do. And I was probably in that camp on the schools measure because it was a tax. You can't have an emergency clause on a tax. So I was always in that mindset of, okay, like I said, if there's going to be a ballot measure, let's be reasonable here. And I think if we set up a carbon bill with that backdrop, that there'd have to be a ballot measure and we'd have to pass it, would it look different than the one that we had in 2019? I think it would have. And I think if we put a reasonable bill out there, I think people in this state would support it. And so that's where I come down on that. I have made it my vow in this campaign. I told my wife, win, lose, or draw, I want to be the guy that has the policies and the proposals and the ideas. And so I have those, from getting more voters out through closing the gap on when you can register, to a thing called ranked choice voting, which is becoming more and more popular as a way of selecting candidates. Benton County just passed it, and maybe that's a story for another day. Anyway, I've got 5 or 6 ways to secure our elections process, including trying to fight this intentional misinformation and fake news that we see in social media. And that's very important to me, to be the policy person in this race. And I hope that's how voters look at this, is this guy has more ideas and he's thinking about this. It's not just a beauty contest. It's not just who's raising the most money. And so that's very important to me. I have the experience. This race is not a consolation prize for me. Like I said, I passed some big issues in that building and I've lost some big issues. But what Oregonians want is someone who has the experience to be a reasonable guy in state government. This is a very important job. And I don't think we can risk it to people who just want to learn about how government works. So all of my issues, in case you have insomnia some night, are on markhas.com, markhas.com. I would love to engage with you or your listeners on all of these issues.